My father's fist crashed down on the mahogany dining table, rattling the crystal glasses as his face flushed with rage. Your sister desperately needs that money for her wedding, and you're refusing to help? After everything we've done for you? I sat frozen, the property tax statement still clutched in my trembling hands. What was supposed to be a pleasant Easter weekend had erupted into a full-blown inquisition about why I was suddenly abandoning my family responsibilities. Little did they know, I had just discovered the truth that would shatter our family's carefully constructed façade forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Natalie Winters, and at 35, I've built a successful career as an investment banker in Chicago. Unlike my peers who came from privileged backgrounds with Ivy League connections, I worked my way up from nothing. I put myself through Stanford with scholarships and working 3 part-time jobs simultaneously: barista in the mornings, library assistant in the afternoons, and restaurant hostess on weekends. I graduated top of my class despite my punishing schedule and earned every promotion through relentless dedication and countless 80-hour weeks at Miller Hoffman Financial. For the past 6 years, I'd been quietly covering the $24,000 annual property taxes on my parents' luxury vacation home in Aspen, paying for my younger sister Vanessa's Range Rover lease, $897 monthly, and funding lavish family vacations to the Maldives, Italy, and the French Riviera, averaging $22,000 annually. I never complained. These were my parents, after all, and my sister. Family helps family, or so I thought. That Easter weekend started like any other family gathering at the Aspen house. The weather was perfect: crisp mountain air, brilliant sunshine, and the last patches of snow clinging to the distant peaks. Dad grilled steaks on the sprawling deck overlooking the mountains. Mom fussed over the table settings, and Vanessa, 30 years old and still finding herself after 3 abandoned career attempts, lounged by the heated infinity pool, occasionally glancing at her phone between sips of champagne. "Natalie, can we talk to you after dinner about the property taxes?" my father asked casually as he sliced into his medium-rare ribeye. "The bill came higher than expected this year." "Sure," I replied, thinking nothing of it. I'd been handling these payments for so long it had become routine. Another responsibility I shouldered without question, just like when I helped Mom with her unexpected dental surgery costs last year, $1,700, or when I covered Dad's new golf club membership, $45,000 initiation fee, as a gift. After dinner, my father slid an envelope across the table. "It's due next month. The county reassessed the property value, so it's gone up about 30%. I opened the envelope and scanned the bill. $31,450. A significant increase, but nothing that would break me. What caught my attention, however, wasn't the tax bill, but another piece of paper that had slipped out partially from behind it. I could make out the words Vanessa Winters Trust and the corner of what appeared to be an official bank logo. "What's this?" I asked, pulling the document free before my father could stop me. "That's private," he snapped, reaching across the table. But it was too late. I was already unfolding what turned out to be a quarterly statement from Pinnacle Private. Banking time seemed to slow as I processed what I was reading. A trust fund established for Vanessa R. Winters with a current balance of $978,652. Quarterly contributions of $25,000. Established by Robert and Catherine Winters, my parents, in 2018. The same year I received my first major bonus at work and began helping out with family expenses. "You have a trust fund for Vanessa?" I whispered, looking up at my father, then my mother, who suddenly seemed intensely interested in her wine glass. "$1 million trust fund?" "It's not quite $1 million, my father corrected, as if that somehow made it better. "And it's for her future. Vanessa needs security." "And I don't?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. You're different, Natalie, my mother finally spoke, her voice soft but matter of fact. You've always been so capable. Vanessa is more delicate. She needs a safety net. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 6 years of paying their expenses while they secretly funneled money into a trust fund for my sister? 6 years of taking red-eye flights from client meetings to make it to family events, only to have Vanessa show up late or not at all with no consequences. Is this why you've never offered to help me with anything? I asked, memories flooding back with painful clarity. When I needed a down payment for my first apartment and you said you were cash poor? When my car died during my final year at Stanford and I had to take the bus for months because you said you just didn't have it right now? My father sighed impatiently. That was different. We knew you'd figure it out. You always do. So I'm punished for being responsible, while Vanessa is rewarded for... I gestured toward the pool where my sister was now taking selfies with her designer sunglasses. Whatever this is? Don't be dramatic, my father dismissed. Now about these property taxes... Wait, I interrupted, something else catching. My eye on the trust statement. These quarterly deposits, $25,000 every 3 months. That's $100,000 a year. Where is that money coming from? I thought you said business had been struggling? My parents exchanged a glance that confirmed my suspicion before they even spoke. We've made some sacrifices, my mother said carefully. What? Kind of sacrifices? I pressed. My father cleared his throat. We've had to leverage some assets, take out a line of credit on the Aspen house. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. They had mortgaged the vacation home, the same home I had, been paying property taxes on for years to fund Vanessa's trust. So I've been paying taxes on a property that you're borrowing against to give money to Vanessa? My voice was barely a whisper now. While telling me you couldn't help me with anything because money was tight? When you put it like that, it sounds bad, my father had the audacity to say. How else would you put it? I asked, ice forming in my veins where warm, familial love had resided just hours before. Vanessa chose that moment to saunter in from the pool, wrapped in an expensive Turkish cotton robe I had given her last Christmas. Are we talking about my wedding? Dad, did you tell Natalie I need her to cover the venue deposit? It's only $35,000, and they're holding the date for me until Monday. I stared at my sister, seeing her, truly seeing her, for perhaps the first time. The entitlement, the expectation, the absolute certainty that I would say yes, just as I always had. No, I said quietly, folding the trust statement and placing it on top of the property tax bill. No, what? Vanessa asked, confusion crossing her face. No, I won't be paying for your wedding venue, or these property taxes, or anything else. And that's when my father's fist crashed down on the mahogany dining table, beginning the confrontation. That would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive back to my downtown Chicago apartment that night was a blur. I left the Aspen house immediately after the confrontation, throwing my clothes into my suitcase while my mother pleaded with me to be reasonable, and my father thundered about family obligation. Vanessa simply stared, slack-jawed, as if she couldn't comprehend a world where I wouldn't fund her desires. The 3-hour flight gave me plenty of time to reflect on how I'd ended up in this position. The pattern had always been there. I just refused to see it. Growing up in our modest suburban home outside of Denver, before my father's manufacturing business took off, there were already signs of the favoritism. Vanessa got dance lessons, horseback, riding camps, and private tutoring at the first sign of academic struggle. I was told to join free school clubs and use the public library for study help. When I was 16 and needed braces, my parents said we'd have to save up for them. That same month, Vanessa received a sweet 16 party that cost over $5,000, complete with a hired DJ and catered food. My 16th birthday had been celebrated with a homemade cake and a $50 gift card. Vanessa is more social, my mother would explain. She needs these experiences for her development. The injustice continued through high school. When I earned a spot in a prestigious science summer program at MIT, my parents claimed they couldn't afford the $3,200 tuition. I spent that summer working at the local grocery store instead, saving every penny for college. Meanwhile, Vanessa failed 2 classes and was rewarded with a study trip to Europe that cost $7,500. Your sister needs the cultural exposure, my father reasoned. You're already so focused and driven. College was where the disparity became undeniable. Despite my perfect GPA and leadership roles, my parents contributed exactly $0 to my Stanford education. We're so proud of your scholarships, they'd say. You're doing just fine on your own. I worked 3 jobs, ate ramen noodles, shared a cramped off-campus apartment with 4 other students, and graduated with $42,000 in student loans. Loans I paid off myself over 6 grueling years of minimal spending while building my career. Vanessa, meanwhile, attended an expensive private university where she changed her major 5 times and took 6 years to graduate with a degree in communications. My parents covered her tuition, her apartment, her car, and gave her a monthly allowance for expenses. When she graduated, they paid off her credit card debt as a graduation gift. Your sister struggles more than you do, my mother would remind me whenever I pointed out the imbalance. You should be thankful you're so self-sufficient. And I believed them. I internalized the idea that my competence was somehow a justification for their neglect. I wore my self-sufficiency like a badge of honor, never allowing myself to question why being capable meant I deserved less support than my chronically irresponsible sister. After landing in Chicago at 1 a.m., I took an Uber directly to my lakefront apartment building. The doorman greeted me with surprise. I wasn't expected back until Monday, but I barely registered his words as I rode the elevator to my 27th floor unit. Once inside, I poured a generous glass of Macallan 18, a rare indulgence, and sat at my home office desk. With trembling fingers, I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet titled Family Financial Contributions. I needed to see the numbers in black and white. I needed to quantify exactly how much of myself I had given to people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM. Line by line, I entered every expense I could remember. Aspen property taxes, $24,000 x 6 years, $144,000. Vanessa's Range Rover lease, $897x, 72 months, $64,584. Family vacations, approximately $22,000 x 6 years, $132,000. Mom's dental surgery, $17,800. Dad's golf membership, $45,000. Vanessa's graduation gift, trip to Bali, $8,700. Emergency roof repair on Aspen House, $32,450. Mom's 60th birthday party, $15,000. Various loans to Vanessa that were never repaid, $27,300. The list went on and on. Small expenses, large expenses, one-time payments, and recurring costs. By the time I finished, it was nearly 4 a.m., and the total made me physically ill. $487,934 over 6 years, almost $500,000. Enough for a down payment on a lake house of my own. Enough to start the boutique investment firm I'd been dreaming of for years. Enough to make a real difference in my own life, rather than enabling my family's entitlement. And during those same 6 years, my parents had deposited $600,000 into Vanessa's trust fund. I sat back in my chair, emotionally drained yet somehow, more clear-headed than I'd been in years. The spell was broken. The veil had been lifted from my eyes. My phone buzzed with incoming texts. From Dad. Your behavior was unacceptable. Call immediately to discuss the property taxes. Due date approaching. From Mom. Sweetheart, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Family helps family. From Vanessa. OMG, can't believe you're being such a bitch about my wedding. It's literally the most important day of my life. Call me when you're done with your tantrum. I silenced my phone without responding and slept dreamlessly until noon. The next day, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and made an appointment with Eleanor Zhao, the financial advisor who had helped me navigate my investments since my first major bonus. I needed professional perspective from someone who wouldn't gaslight me into believing that exploitation was love. "I'll be direct, Eleanor," I said, sliding my spreadsheet across her desk. "I've been financially supporting my family for years, while they've been secretly building a trust fund for my sister. I need to understand my options." Eleanor reviewed the numbers, her expression growing increasingly troubled. She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose and fixed me with a serious look. "Natalie, your generosity is commendable, but this is financial abuse," she said bluntly. "There's no other way to put it. They've been exploiting your success while actively disadvantaging you compared to your sister." "I thought I was just being a good daughter," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "There's a difference between helping family and being taken advantage of," Eleanor replied. "And this," she tapped the spreadsheet, "is the latter." For the next 2 hours, we developed a detailed financial plan. I would need to 1. Document everything with bank statements, transfer records, and receipts. 2. Formally remove myself as an authorized payer on any family accounts. Cancel any recurring payments immediately. Create a clear boundary statement. About future financial involvement. 5. Potentially consult with an attorney if my parents attempted to create legal obligations. "Are you prepared for the emotional fallout?" Eleanor asked gently as our meeting concluded. Family financial boundaries often trigger intense reactions. I thought about the trust fund, about years of inequality disguised as helping the one who needs it more, about the property tax bill my father still expected me to pay despite everything I now knew. "I'm prepared," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days. "They've had 6 years and nearly $500,000 of my money. That ends now." As I left Eleanor's office, my phone rang. It was my father. Again. I sent it to voicemail and listened to the message later. "Natalie, this behavior is childish and irresponsible. The property taxes are due in 3 weeks. The checkbook is waiting for you. Don't disappoint your family." I deleted the message and blocked his number. That evening, I drafted formal emails to the Aspen County Tax Assessor's Office, the bank handling Vanessa's car lease, and every other financial entity connecting me to my family's expenses. In each message, I respectfully informed them that I would no longer be making payments on these accounts and requested removal as an authorized payer. With each email sent, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time in 6 years, I was putting myself first. The guilt was still there. Years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. But alongside it was something new and unfamiliar. Rage. White-hot, clarifying rage at how thoroughly I'd been manipulated by the people who were supposed to love me most. By midnight, I had reclaimed my financial autonomy. The property taxes, the car lease, the credit card payments, none of them were my responsibility anymore. I transferred $487,934 from my primary brokerage account to a new, separate investment fund labeled My Future, and slept soundly for the first time since discovering the trust fund. The real storm, I knew, was yet to come. My family wouldn't surrender their cash cow without a fight. The fallout was swift and explosive. Within 48 hours of my departure from Aspen, my personal email inbox had accumulated 23 messages from various family members. My father's communications progressed from demanding to threatening to eerily calm, a trajectory I recognized from childhood as his 3-stage approach to getting his way. My mother's emails were strategically guilt-laden. "I didn't sleep all. Night worrying about you, and, after all we've sacrificed for you, featured prominently. Vanessa simply sent links to her wedding venue with "deposit due" in the subject line, as if my discovery of their deception had never happened. I responded to none of them. On day 3, I received an unexpected email from my maternal uncle, Richard, who had always been peripherally aware of our family dynamics, but never involved himself directly. "Natalie," he wrote, "your father is telling everyone you've had some kind of breakdown and abandoned your responsibilities to the family. He's seeking a temporary loan to cover the Aspen property taxes and other urgent family expenses. What's really going on?" I hadn't planned on involving the extended family, but my father had opened that door. I sent Richard a concise summary of the situation, including the spreadsheet of my contributions and the revelation of Vanessa's trust fund. His response was immediate and validating. "I've suspected something like this for years, but had no idea of the scale. Your parents treated you differently from Vanessa since you were children. No one in the family will be lending them money once I share what you've told me. With your permission. Stand your ground." His support fortified my resolve just in time for the next escalation. On day 5, my doorman called up to my apartment. "Ms. Winters, your parents are in the lobby insisting on seeing you. They say it's a family emergency." My heart pounded. Did they specify the emergency? "No, ma'am. But they seem quite agitated." I took a deep breath. "Please inform them that I'm unavailable and will not be receiving visitors today. They're saying they won't leave until they speak with you. Then please call building security and have them escorted out. They are not welcome at this time." 20 minutes later, my doorman confirmed they had left, but not before my father threatened to call the police and report me as mentally unstable, and my mother collapsed into theatrical tears in the middle of the lobby. Classic Robert and Catherine Winters manipulation tactics, executed with practiced precision. In the past, I would have capitulated immediately, desperate to restore family harmony at any cost, especially my own well-being. Not anymore. Later that evening, I received a voice message from Vanessa that represented an entirely new approach: conciliation. "Natalie, I had no idea you've been paying for so much all these years." Her voice dripped with newfound gratitude. "Dad always told me these were family expenses that everyone contributed to. I feel terrible. Can we please talk, maybe over lunch? At Mireille's?" My treat. Mireille's was an expensive French restaurant downtown, a strategic choice that would allow Vanessa to demonstrate her sudden financial responsibility while remaining firmly in public where I couldn't make a scene. I knew from experience that any substantive confrontation would be deferred to another time, which would never come. I texted back, "I'm not available for lunch. If you want to discuss the situation, we can do so over Zoom. Let me know what time works for you." Her response was telling. "Why are you being so difficult? I'm trying to fix things." I didn't bother replying. A week after discovering the trust fund, I returned to work at Miller Hoffman Financial, throwing myself into my clients' portfolios with renewed focus. My personal financial house cleaning had sparked a professional epiphany. I needed to accelerate my 5-year plan to launch my own investment firm. Working for myself would provide not just financial independence, but freedom from the success-punishment cycle my family had conditioned me to accept. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus Rivera, a fellow investment banker who had successfully established his own boutique firm 3 years prior. Over coffee in his sleek downtown office, I outlined my situation without family specifics. "I need to expedite my transition to independent practice," I explained. "Ideally within 12-18 months, rather than my original 3-year timeline." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. "What's changed?" "Let's just say I've recently recognized how much of my earnings have been diverted to supporting others rather than building my own future." Understanding flickered across his face. "Family financial entanglements?" I nodded. "Been there?" he said grimly. My brother-in-law nearly bankrupted us before I established clear boundaries. He pulled out a legal pad. Let's map out what you'll need, capital requirements, client transition strategy, operational logistics, compliance considerations. For the next 3 hours, we crafted a detailed roadmap. By the time I left, I had a concrete plan to establish Winters Capital Partners. By the end of the following year, contingent on retaining 65% of my current client base and maintaining my personal savings rate without family financial drains. As I walked back to my office, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. The property tax late notices have arrived. Penalties accruing daily. Vanessa's car was nearly repossessed. Your mother is distraught. This childish behavior has real consequences for your family. The emotional hook was baited perfectly. Concern about my mother, implied threats about family stability, and the suggestion that my boundaries were childish rather than entirely reasonable. 6 months ago, I would have immediately transferred the money, apologized for causing distress, and resumed my role as the family financial savior. Instead, I typed, "I'm aware of the consequences. They are the natural result of financial decisions, made without my input or consent. I've contributed nearly $500,000 to family expenses while you established a trust fund exclusively for Vanessa. I won't be providing additional funding." His response was immediate. "That's your sister's future security. This is about family obligations." I wrote back, "Exactly. It is about family obligations, ones that should be shared equitably, not placed entirely on me while Vanessa receives preferential treatment. We'll discuss this when you've calmed down and come to your senses," he replied, clearly expecting the last word. I couldn't resist. I am perfectly calm and entirely sensible. In fact, I've never seen things more clearly. Also, I've documented all my financial contributions to the family over the past 6 years and shared them with Uncle Richard and Aunt Diana. No response. The mention of my having receipts and involving extended family members had apparently short-circuited his standard playbook. Good. That weekend, I hired Patricia Mendoza, a forensic accountant recommended by Eleanor, to produce an official analysis of my family contributions versus the growth of Vanessa's trust fund. I provided bank statements, transfer records, emails discussing financial help, and even text messages from my parents and sister thanking me for various payments. "This is quite comprehensive," Patricia noted, sorting through the documentation. "Most people don't keep such detailed records." "My profession requires meticulous attention to financial details," I explained. "I just never thought I'd need to apply those skills to my own family relationships." 3 days later, Patricia delivered a bound report that confirmed my spreadsheet calculations and added important context. The total value of my contributions, when factoring in lost investment opportunity based on my portfolio's historical performance, exceeded $612,000. During the same period, my parents had contributed $600,000 to Vanessa's trust fund while claiming financial hardship whenever I needed assistance. The report's executive summary concluded, "The pattern of financial diversion from one family member to exclusively benefit another, while maintaining deceptive narratives about resource availability, constitutes a clear case of financial exploitation." Seeing those words in professional clinical language was strangely validating. This wasn't a family squabble or a misunderstanding. It was exploitation, pure and simple. Armed with Patricia's report, I felt ready for whatever escalation came next. I didn't have to wait long. On Wednesday evening, my sister showed up unannounced at my office building's lobby as I was leaving work. She wore a designer outfit I recognized from the spring collection I had purchased for her last Christmas. Another irony that didn't escape my notice. "We need to talk," she declared, blocking my path to the revolving doors. "This has gone on long enough." I checked my watch. "I have exactly 15 minutes before my dinner reservation. What do you want to discuss? The car was almost repossessed, she said, tears forming instantly. Vanessa had always been able to cry on command, a skill I both envied and despised. They came to my apartment building. It was humiliating. Did they actually take the car? I asked clinically. No, she admitted. Dad paid it at the last minute, but he said he had to dip into my trust fund to do it. And there it was, the real reason for her visit. Not concern about our relationship or recognition of the inequality, but panic about her precious trust fund being touched. So you do know about the trust fund? I said quietly. She had the grace to look slightly ashamed. I've always known about it. Dad set it up when he realized how successful you were becoming. He said it was to balance things out since you were doing so well on your own. The casual cruelty of this perspective took my breath away. My success, earned through relentless work and sacrifice, had been used as justification to further advantage my sister at my expense. Let me make sure I understand, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Dad created a trust fund for you because I worked hard and succeeded, then used my success to justify asking me to pay for family expenses while contributing to your trust fund. And you knew about this arrangement the entire time. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. When you put it like that, it sounds bad. How else would you put it? The same question I had asked my father in Aspen. Look, I didn't ask for any of this, she said defensively. It's not my fault they decided to do things this way. No, but you benefited from it knowingly, I pointed out, and never once questioned the fairness of it. What was I supposed to do? Turn down the trust fund? You could have insisted it be split equally between us. You could have declined their support when you knew I was getting none. You could have, at minimum, expressed gratitude for my contributions instead of demanding more. She stared at me, genuinely perplexed. But you've always been the strong one, the successful one. You don't need help like I do. In that moment, I realized that Vanessa truly believed this narrative. In her mind, my competence justified my exploitation. My success made me less deserving of support, not more. It was a worldview so fundamentally twisted that no single conversation could unravel it. My dinner reservation is waiting, I said, stepping around her. I suggest you start looking for a job that can cover your car payments. Natalie, wait, she called after me. What about my wedding? The venue won't hold the date past Friday. I kept walking, her plaintive cries fading behind me as I pushed through the revolving doors into the warm Chicago evening. The storm was intensifying, but for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't racing to provide the umbrella. 2 weeks. After discovering the trust fund, I received a formal invitation in the mail that made me laugh out loud at its audacity. Embossed on heavyweight cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, it announced, "The Winters family cordially requests your presence for an important family discussion. Saturday, June 12th at 3 p.m., the Madison Room, Langham Hotel, Chicago." A handwritten note from my mother added, "Please come, sweetheart. We need to work this out as a family." They had chosen neutral territory in my city, a strategic concession, but the formality of the invitation suggested this was not a reconciliation effort, but a carefully orchestrated intervention. The Langham was one of Chicago's most exclusive hotels where my father often hosted business negotiations when he wanted to impress and intimidate simultaneously. The Madison Room was a private meeting space that guaranteed both luxury and discretion. I recognized the tactics at play. They wanted a public setting where I would feel pressure to maintain composure too. The illusion of meeting me on my terms by coming to Chicago 3. The psychological advantage of having arranged and controlled the meeting environment, I briefly considered declining, but strategic thinking prevailed. This confrontation was inevitable, and I preferred to face it prepared rather than be ambushed again. I would attend, but on my terms. I texted Eleanor, Family ambush meeting scheduled at the Langham. Would you be willing to accompany me as professional support? Her response came quickly. Absolutely. I'll clear my Saturday. We'll prepare Thursday. Next, I contacted Patricia Mendoza. Need 5 printed copies of your financial analysis for a family meeting. Can you deliver to my office by Friday? No problem. Do you want the detailed appendices or just the summary report? Both. And an executive one-pager for quick reference. With my professional reinforcements secured, I called my cousin Thomas, the only family member besides Uncle Richard who had shown genuine concern for my situation. They're planning some kind of family intervention at the Langham, I explained, after filling him in on recent events. Classic Uncle Robert. Thomas sighed. He pulled the same thing when my dad questioned him about business investments last year. Fancy setting, witnesses to prevent anyone from making a scene, the illusion of reasonable dialogue. I'm going, I told him, but I'm bringing my financial advisor and documentation. Good. Want me there too? I can fly in Friday night. I hesitated. Thomas was the VP of marketing at a Seattle tech firm and had 2 young children. That's a big ask for a weekend. Not if it means supporting family who actually deserves it, he said firmly. Plus, I can provide first-hand perspective on how your parents have discussed your financial contributions to others. Spoiler alert, they've been taking full credit for the Aspen House upkeep and family vacations. Why am I not surprised? I said grimly. If you're serious about coming, I'd appreciate the backup. Text me the details. I'll be there. By Saturday. Afternoon, I had assembled my support team. Eleanor, Patricia, and Thomas met at my apartment for a final strategy session before heading to the Langham. Remember, Eleanor advised as our Uber approached the hotel, this is a business negotiation disguised as a family meeting. Stay focused on facts, not emotions. Your parents will try to pull you into emotional territory because that's where their power lies. They've had decades to perfect their manipulation tactics, Thomas added. Aunt Catherine's tears have persuaded stronger people than me. That's why we have documentation. Patricia patted her leather portfolio. Numbers don't cry. We arrived. At the Langham at exactly 3 p.m., not early, which would cede psychological advantage, and not late, which would give them cause for complaint. The Madison room was easy to spot. 2 stern-looking men I recognized as my father's business associates stood outside the double doors, clearly intended to project authority. Reinforcements, I murmured to my team. Dad's brought his own backup. Predictable, Eleanor replied calmly, and ultimately ineffective against facts. We approached the doors, and one of the men, Walter Jenkins, my father's longtime attorney, stepped forward. Natalie, your parents asked that this be a private family discussion. These people are with me, I replied firmly. Either they come in or I leave now. Walter's expression tightened, but he stepped aside after a brief internal calculation. We entered the Madison room to find an expertly crafted tableau, my parents seated side by side at a round table strewn with family photos, Vanessa looking subdued in a conservative outfit, a clear departure from her usual style, and 2 empty chairs clearly intended for me and possibly Thomas. The addition of Eleanor and Patricia visibly disrupted their staging. My father rose, face already flushing with the anger he was struggling to contain. This is a family matter, he said by way of greeting. I don't know why you've brought strangers. I've brought professional support, just as you've brought Walter and Richard. I nodded toward his associates. This stopped being just a family matter when I discovered you've been exploiting me financially while secretly funding Vanessa's trust. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Sweetheart, that's a very harsh characterization of our family arrangements. Is it? I asked, taking a seat and gesturing for my team to join me. Thomas pulled over additional chairs from the side of the room. I've brought some documentation that might interest everyone. Patricia silently distributed copies of her report to each person at the table. My father made no move to touch his, while my mother reluctantly picked hers up with the tips of her fingers as if it might bite. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, flipping through the pages with growing alarm. "It's a forensic financial analysis of my contributions to family expenses over the past 6 years, contrasted with the growth of your trust fund during the same period," I explained. "The executive summary is on page 1. An uncomfortable silence fell as they skimmed the document. Walter Jenkins, ever the attorney, was the first to fully digest its implications. He leaned over to whisper something in my father's ear, but Dad waved him off impatiently. "This is preposterous," he declared, finally deigning to glance at the report. "You've always helped the family voluntarily. There was never any obligation." "That's correct," I agreed. "There was no obligation, which makes it all the more egregious that you concealed Vanessa's trust fund while claiming financial hardship whenever I needed support." "We raised you," my mother interjected, her voice trembling. "We gave you everything. You needed to succeed. Did you?" I countered, keeping my voice level. Page 12 details educational expenses. "You contributed $0 to my college education while covering Vanessa's entirely, including her luxury apartment and spending money. I graduated with $42,000 in student loans that I paid off myself." "You had scholarships," she protested, weakly. "Partial scholarships. And 3 jobs." My father attempted to regain control of the narrative. "We're not here to rehash ancient history. We're here to discuss your current obligations to the family, particularly the Aspen property taxes, and your sister's wedding expenses." "I have no obligations to the family," I stated firmly. "As you've just acknowledged, my financial support was always voluntary. I've chosen to discontinue that support in light of the discovery that you've been deceptive about family resources." "Don't be selfish, Natalie," Vanessa broke in, apparently unable to maintain her subdued facade any longer. "My wedding venue deposit is due on Monday. $35,000. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money on short notice?" "From your trust fund," Thomas suggested mildly. "The one worth nearly $1 million. Vanessa shot him a betrayed look. "That's for my future security." "And what exactly is Natalie's future security based on?" Eleanor spoke for the first time, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the emotional undercurrents swirling around the table. "From my analysis of her financial situation, she's diverted nearly 40% of her discretionary income to family expenses over the past 6 years, funds that should have been building her own security." My father turned his attention to Eleanor, clearly identifying her as a threat to his authority. "And who are you exactly?" "Eleanor Zhao, certified financial advisor and fiduciary. I've been working with Natalie for 5 years and have witnessed firsthand the impact of these financial diversions on her long-term planning." "This is absurd," my father blustered. "Natalie makes more than enough money to help her family and secure her own future." "That's not your decision to make," I said, quietly. "My earnings are mine to allocate, just as your resources are yours. You've chosen to allocate substantial resources exclusively to Vanessa. I've chosen to stop subsidizing that inequality." "After everything we've done for you," my mother began, tears flowing freely now, "what exactly have you done for me?" I interrupted, surprising myself with the directness of the question. "Financially, specifically in my adult life, what support have you provided?" The silence that followed was deafening. "That's what I thought," I continued. "Meanwhile, I've provided $487,934 in direct financial support to this family over 6 years, while you've contributed $600,000 to Vanessa's trust fund during the same period." Walter Jenkins finally spoke up. "If I may suggest, perhaps a compromise is in order." The Winters could establish a matching trust for Natalie going forward, while Natalie could consider continuing some level of family support. particularly for shared assets like the Aspen property that ultimately benefits everyone. No, I said simply, all eyes turned to me. No compromise? Walter asked, clearly surprised by my intransigence. No trust fund, I clarified. I don't want or need my parents' money. I've proven quite capable of generating my own wealth. What I want is acknowledgement of the exploitation that has occurred and a commitment that it won't continue. Exploitation is a very serious accusation, Walter cautioned. Patricia tapped the report in front of her. It's also an accurate one, based on the financial evidence. Page 24 outlines the specific instances where the Winters claimed inability to assist Natalie with essential expenses while simultaneously making substantial deposits to Vanessa's trust fund. My father's face had progressed from red to nearly purple. I will not sit here and be accused of exploiting my own daughter by people who know nothing about our family dynamics. Then perhaps you should listen to someone who does know about your family dynamics, Thomas interjected. I've watched for years as you've treated Natalie as the family workhorse while treating Vanessa as the family princess. Everyone in the extended family has noticed it, but no one said anything because Natalie never complained. This is unconscionable, my father sputtered, rising from his chair. We came here in good faith to resolve a family matter, and you've turned it into some kind of tribunal. You came here to pressure me into resuming financial support without addressing the underlying inequality, I corrected him. That's not happening. My mother reached across the table toward me, her hand trembling. Natalie, please. We're your parents. We love you. Whatever mistakes we've made, can't we find a way forward as a family? For a moment, her plea almost reached me. The little girl inside who still craved parental approval wanted desperately to capitulate, to restore harmony at any cost. But the adult woman who had finally recognized her own worth held firm. We can find a way forward, I agreed. But not one that involves me funding the Aspen house taxes, Vanessa's wedding, or any other family expense while the trust fund disparity remains unaddressed. What exactly do you want? My father demanded, clearly expecting a counter-demand for money. I want 3 things, I said, looking each family member in the eye. First, acknowledgement from all of you that the financial arrangements of the past 6 years have been fundamentally unfair. Second, I want a formal apology for the deception regarding family resources. And third, I want a commitment that any future family financial decisions will be made with complete transparency. That's it? Vanessa asked incredulously. You don't want money? I don't need your money, I replied. I need honesty and fairness. My father scoffed. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a victim when you've been fortunate enough to have a successful career that allows you to help your family. Robert, Walter cautioned quietly. Perhaps we should consider… Consider what? My father snapped. Apologizing for providing for my younger daughter? For doing what any parent would do? Most parents don't actively exploit one child to benefit another, Eleanor pointed out. And they certainly don't lie about it for years. My father slammed his hand on the table. I've heard enough. Natalie, this is your last chance. Either resume your family responsibilities, or don't expect to remain part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the air like a thundercloud. In all my preparation, I hadn't anticipated this nuclear option. Complete family excommunication unless… I complied with their financial demands. To my surprise, my mother was the first to break the tension. Robert, stop, she said quietly. This isn't right. Everyone turned to look at her, including my father, whose expression registered shock at this unexpected defiance. Catherine, we discussed this, he said through gritted teeth. We discussed. Trying to reason with Natalie, she replied, her voice growing stronger. Not threatening to cut her off from the family. She turned to me, really looking at me for perhaps the first time in years. I had no idea how much you've been contributing, Natalie. Your father always handled the finances. He told me you were helping with a few expenses because you wanted to. That's not true, I said gently. I helped because I was repeatedly told the family needed my support, that you couldn't afford the property taxes, that Vanessa needed help with her car, that family vacations would be impossible without my contribution. My mother's face crumpled as she turned to my father. Is that true, Robert? Did you tell her we couldn't afford these things? I did what was necessary to protect this family, he replied stiffly. By lying to me and exploiting our daughter? My mother's voice rose with indignation. By creating a trust fund for Vanessa while telling Natalie we couldn't help with her education? Mom, Vanessa interjected, clearly alarmed by this unexpected maternal rebellion. Dad was just trying to make sure I was taken care of. And who was taking care of Natalie? My mother demanded, tears streaming down her face. Certainly not. Us, not me. She turned back to me. I'm so sorry, Natalie, I didn't know. I should have asked more questions, been more involved in the finances. This isn't right. The admission was so unexpected, so genuine, that I felt my own eyes filling with tears. Thank you for saying that, Mom. My father was having none of it. Catherine, you're being manipulated. Natalie has brought these people here to turn you against me. The only person who has been manipulating anyone is you, Dad, I said, finding unexpected strength in my mother's support. For years, you've manipulated all of us, telling Mom one story, me another, and creating a financial reality that benefited only Vanessa while burdening me. That's not, he began, but Walter Jenkins placed a restraining hand on his arm. Robert, the attorney said quietly, I've reviewed the financial documentation. It's quite thorough and would be problematic if this matter escalated further. I suggest we consider Natalie's requests seriously. My father's face contorted with the effort of containing his rage. Fine, he spat. You want acknowledgement? I acknowledge that you've contributed significantly to family expenses. You want an apology? I'm sorry you feel you've been treated unfairly. You want transparency? From now on, you'll be informed of major family financial decisions. That's not good enough, Thomas said, speaking for all of us. Those aren't real acknowledgments or apologies. It's the best you're going to get, my father snapped, standing abruptly. Now, are you going to help with the property taxes or not? I rose, to meet his gaze. No, I'm not. Not now. Not ever again. Then we have nothing more to discuss. He gathered his papers and gestured to Walter. Catherine, Vanessa, we're leaving. My mother hesitated, looking between my father and me, torn between decades of submission and this new awakening to injustice. Mom, I said softly, you don't have to go with him. Of course she does, my father barked. Catherine, now. My mother stood slowly, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm sorry, Natalie, she whispered. I need time to process all this. Vanessa followed them without a backward glance, her fury evident in the rigid set of her shoulders. As the door closed behind them, I sank back into my chair, emotionally. Drained but oddly liberated. That went about as well as could be expected, Eleanor said, squeezing my hand. Your mother's reaction was unexpected. And promising. She seemed genuinely shocked, Thomas agreed. I don't think she knew the extent of what Uncle Robert was doing. What happens now? I asked, suddenly uncertain about the path forward. Now, Patricia said kindly, you live your life on your own terms, free from financial exploitation and family manipulation. And if they come back with more demands? I worried. Thomas grinned. Then we reconvene the dream team and shut them down again. For the first time in weeks, I laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that felt like the beginning of healing. As we left the Langham, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. I need to talk to you, alone. Tomorrow? Perhaps there was hope for at least one relationship to be salvaged from the wreckage of family deception. But this time, it would be on my terms, with honesty, respect, and the fierce protection of the boundaries I had finally learned to establish. The day after the Langham confrontation, I met my mother at a quiet cafe near my apartment. I'd chosen the location carefully, public enough to discourage emotional outbursts, but secluded enough for a private conversation. I arrived early and selected a corner table where I could watch the door, a habit I'd developed during tense business negotiations. My mother arrived precisely on time, looking smaller somehow, diminished. The designer handbag and perfectly coordinated outfit couldn't mask the exhaustion evident in her face. For the first time, I noticed the faint tremor in her hands as she set her purse on the chair beside her. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice subdued. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But your reaction yesterday suggested you might actually be willing to listen." The server appeared, and we both ordered coffee, her usual complex latte with modifications, my simple Americano. The contrast wasn't lost on me. It mirrored our approaches to life in many ways. Once we were alone again, my mother surprised me by getting straight to the point. "I spent the night going through our financial records," she said, pulling a leather-bound portfolio from her purse. "Robert doesn't know I have access to his home office safe. He's always assumed I'm uninterested in financial matters. That was true for most of our marriage, but after yesterday, I needed to see for myself." She opened the portfolio to reveal meticulously organized printouts, bank statements, trust documents, property records, all highlighted and annotated in her precise handwriting. "You were right, Natalie, about everything." Her voice broke slightly. "The trust fund for Vanessa was established the same month you received your first major bonus at Miller Hoffman. Your father told me it was funded from business profits. He never mentioned that you were simultaneously covering our expenses." She flipped to another section. "And here, the line of credit on the Aspen house was taken out explicitly to fund the trust, while you were paying the property taxes on it." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I feel like such a fool." "You weren't the only one deceived," I said, surprised by my own compassion. "Dad's manipulation affected all of us. But I should have known. I should have asked questions." She closed the portfolio. "Did you know your father has been presenting himself as the financial provider for the entire family? At the country club, with his business associates. He takes full credit for the lifestyle we lead, the vacations you funded, the property you maintained. He's built his identity around being the successful patriarch." This explained so much, why my father had reacted with such hostility to my financial rebellion. I wasn't just threatening his wallet. I was threatening his carefully constructed public image. "What does this mean for you?" I asked carefully. "For your marriage?" My mother's hand trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. "I don't know yet. 58 years is a long time to be with someone, to build a life together." She set the cup down without drinking. "But I can't unsee what I've seen. I can't unknow what I now know." Her gaze met mine, suddenly fierce. "What I do know is that I won't be complicit in his treatment of you anymore. Last night, when we returned to the hotel, he was already making plans to approach you again. Talking about leveraging emotional pressure points to make you see reason, as if your completely justified feelings were somehow unreasonable." "That sounds like Dad," I said grimly. I told him I wouldn't participate. We had the worst fight of our marriage. She smoothed her napkin with trembling fingers. "This morning, I took some money from our joint account, my own money, from my mother's inheritance that I've never touched, and checked into a different hotel. I needed space to think." The revelation stunned me. In 35 years, I had never known my mother to openly defy my father. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who persuaded everyone to go along with Robert's plans for the sake of family harmony. "Mom, that's significant." It's long overdue, she replied with unexpected firmness. Natalie, I owe you an apology. Not just for the financial exploitation, which is inexcusable, but for failing to advocate for you throughout your life. For allowing your father's favoritism toward Vanessa to go unchallenged. For not being the mother you deserved. Her words hit me with physical force, the validation I had craved for decades without even realizing it. Tears sprang to my eyes. I thought it was me, I whispered. I thought there was something wrong with me, something that made me less lovable, less deserving of support. She reached across the table and grasped my hand. No, sweetheart, never that. You were always extraordinary, so capable, so independent. I told myself you didn't need the extra attention, the extra support, because you were thriving anyway. I convinced myself it was a compliment to treat you differently, to expect more from you. I was wrong, and I'm so very sorry. What happens now? I asked, echoing the question I'd posed to my team after the Langham meeting. That depends partly on you, she said. I want to make amends, but I understand if that's not possible. If the damage is too great. I considered this. The hurt ran deep. Decades of inequity couldn't be erased with a single conversation. But the woman sitting across from me was showing courage and self-reflection I had never witnessed in her before. I think, I said slowly, that amends start with actions, not just words, with tangible changes. She nodded. I've been thinking about that too. I'd like to make some concrete proposals if you're willing to hear them. I'm listening. First, I want to establish a formal legal agreement regarding the Aspen House. You've paid the property taxes for 6 years. That represents a significant investment. I believe you should have an ownership stake proportional to your contributions. I blinked in surprise. Dad would never agree to that. He might not have a choice, she replied with unexpected steel in her voice. Half the house is mine, and Colorado is a marital property state. I can transfer a portion of my interest to you. Without his consent, you'd do that? It's the right thing to do. Your financial contributions have preserved and maintained that asset. You should have equity in it. She sipped her latte. Second, I want to address the trust fund situation. I can't force your father to establish an equal trust for you, and from what you said yesterday, you wouldn't accept one anyway. I wouldn't, I confirmed. I don't need or want their money. What I can do is ensure complete transparency about the trust going forward. No more secret allocations, no more lies about family resources. She hesitated. And I'd like to establish a small trust of my own for you, using solely my inheritance from my mother. Not because you need financial support, but as a tangible acknowledgement of the inequality you've experienced. The offer touched me more than I expected. It wasn't about the money, I had plenty of my own, but about the recognition, the visible commitment to righting a wrong. I'd have to think about that, I said honestly. Of course, there's no pressure or timeline. She straightened her shoulders. Third, I want you to know that I've informed Vanessa that I will not be contributing to her wedding expenses. If she wants a $35,000 venue, she can use her trust fund. It's time she learned that money has value and choices have consequences. This was perhaps the most shocking development of all. My mother setting boundaries with Vanessa. How did she take that? Poorly, my mother admitted with a grim smile. There were tears, accusations, the usual dramatics, but I held firm. And Dad? He's furious with me. Says I'm undermining his authority, choosing you over the family. He doesn't see the irony in that statement. She sighed heavily. Natalie, I don't know what the future holds for my marriage. Robert and I have a lot to work through, and it may not be salvageable. But regardless of what happens between us, I want to repair my relationship with you, if you're willing. The sincerity in her eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't manipulation or temporary contrition. This was genuine remorse and a desire for change. I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but an opening to the possibility. I'd die. Like that, I said softly. It won't be easy or quick. I know. I'm prepared for that. And what about Vanessa? I asked. Where does she stand in all this? My mother's expression grew troubled. Vanessa is struggling with these revelations. She's always believed she was entitled to the support she received, that it was natural and right for the family to prioritize her needs. Learning that it came at your expense, and that much of it actually came from you rather than from your father, as she believed. It's challenging her entire worldview. Has she expressed any remorse? Any recognition of the inequality? Not yet, my mother admitted. She's still in the denial and anger phase. But I have hope that she'll come around eventually, especially when the financial reality of her situation becomes clear. What do you mean? Your father informed her last night that he can no longer maintain the current level of trust fund contributions, now that you've stopped covering family expenses. The taxes on the Aspen house are coming due. There's the line of credit to service. And without your subsidy, something has to give. He's chosen to reduce the quarterly trust deposits from $25,000 to $10,000. I couldn't help the small, vindictive satisfaction that flared at this news. So the gravy train is slowing down. Considerably, my mother confirmed. And Vanessa is facing the prospect of actually needing to support herself for the first time in her adult life. It's going to be a difficult adjustment. For both of them, I observed. Dad's entire self-image is built around being the magnanimous provider. This undermines his core identity. My mother nodded. That's a remarkably insightful observation. Your father has always defined himself by his ability to provide, or appear to provide, a certain lifestyle for his family, particularly for Vanessa, who represents to him the perfect dependent daughter who validates his role. While I represented the threat, she finished softly. The independent child who didn't need him in the same way, who could succeed without his help. He both resented and leveraged your independence, using it to justify withholding support while simultaneously benefiting from it through your financial contributions. The psychological clarity of her assessment surprised me. You've given this a lot of thought. I've had decades of observing your father's patterns, she replied. I just never had the courage to challenge them until now. She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. There's one more thing. This is for you. I took the envelope cautiously. What is it? Open it later when you're alone. She glanced at her watch and gathered her things. I should go. Robert is expecting me to meet him and our attorneys at noon. Attorneys? I raised an eyebrow. I've consulted with a family law specialist, she said calmly. Whatever happens next, I want to ensure my interests, and by extension, yours, are protected. As she rose to leave, I found myself standing as well, drawn into an embrace that felt different from any we had shared before. Genuine, equal, unburdened by manipulation or unspoken expectations. Thank you, Mom, I whispered, for believing me, for taking action. Thank you for having the courage to stand up for yourself, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. You've inspired me to find my own courage. After she left, I ordered another coffee and opened the envelope she had given me. Inside was a cashier's check for $487,934, the exact amount I had contributed to family expenses over the past 6 years, along with a handwritten note. This doesn't erase the past or make up for years of inequality. It's simply the return of what was always rightfully yours. I've withdrawn it from my personal inheritance account, not from joint funds with your father. Please accept it as the first step in making amends. With love and deep regret for the pain we've caused, Mom. I stared at the check, tears blurring my vision. The amount wasn't life-changing for me financially. I had already rebuilt my savings after separating my finances from the family. But the gesture was profound, a tangible acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done to me, and a concrete step toward restitution. I carefully folded the check and note and placed them back in the envelope. I wasn't sure yet whether I would deposit it, but the option itself was healing. The power to choose, the respect for my agency that had been missing from our family dynamic for so long. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. How did it go with Aunt Catherine? I typed back, surprisingly well, she's taking real action. I think I may have found an unexpected ally. His response came quickly. About time. Let me know if you need anything. The dream team stands ready. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. For the first time in this painful journey, I wasn't standing alone against my family's dysfunction. I had support, professional, familial, and now, unexpectedly, maternal. The road ahead would still be difficult. My father wouldn't surrender his control or narrative easily. Vanessa would struggle to accept her reduced circumstances and her complicity in my exploitation. Relationships would need to be redefined, boundaries established and defended. But, for the first time, I felt genuinely hopeful that healing was possible. Not through capitulation or compromise of my worth, but through honest recognition of the past and meaningful changes for the future. As I left the cafe, I found myself walking taller, breathing easier. The burden of unreasonable expectations and unacknowledged sacrifices had been lifted. I was reclaiming not just my financial autonomy, but my rightful place in the family, not as the overlooked workhorse, but as an equal member deserving of respect, fairness, and love. The unexpected alliance with my mother had shifted the family dynamic in ways I couldn't yet fully comprehend. But one thing was clear. Things would never go back to the way they were, and that was perfectly fine with me. 3 weeks after my reconciliatory meeting with my mother, I received an official-looking envelope from Hamilton, Breyer & Associates, a prestigious law firm I recognized as specializing in estate planning and family wealth management. With some trepidation, I opened it to find a formal letter on heavy letterhead. Dear Ms. Winters, this letter serves as official notification that you have been granted a 25% ownership stake in the property located at 145 Aspen Heights Road, Aspen, Colorado, heretofore referred to as the Aspen Residence. This transfer of ownership has been executed via quitclaim deed by Catherine Winters, who previously held 50% ownership of said property as marital property. Enclosed, please find copies of all relevant documentation, including the newly recorded deed, updated property insurance information, and homeowners association documents. Your proportional responsibility for future expenses related to the property will be limited to 25% of total costs, commensurate with your ownership percentage. Additionally, we have been instructed to inform you that a property management company has been engaged to oversee the maintenance and rental of the Aspen residence. When not in use by family members, rental profits, if any, will be distributed quarterly according to ownership percentages. Please sign and return the enclosed acknowledgement of receipt at your earliest convenience. Respectfully, Jennifer Hamilton, Escortillo, Hamilton, Breyer, and Associates. I sat at my kitchen counter, stunned by the swift and decisive action my mother had taken. She hadn't just talked about making changes, she had actually transferred a significant asset to me without fanfare or emotional manipulation. The 25% stake was a fair reflection of my contributions over the years, not excessive, but meaningful. My phone rang, and I wasn't surprised to see my father's name on the caller ID. I braced myself and answered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he thundered without preamble. "Conspiring with your mother behind my back? Forcing her to sign over part of our vacation home?" "I didn't force Mom to do anything," I replied calmly. "This was entirely her decision." "Bullshit," he spat. Catherine would never have thought of this on her own. You manipulated her, turned her against me. That's an interesting perspective, Dad, considering your history of manipulation. I kept my voice even. Mom made this decision after reviewing our family's financial records and recognizing that I've contributed significantly to maintaining a property I had no ownership stake in. It's a matter of fairness, nothing more. Fairness? He scoffed. You want to talk about fairness when you've abandoned your family responsibilities? The property taxes are overdue, penalties accruing daily. Your sister had to downgrade her wedding venue because you refused to help. Your mother is staying in a hotel rather than coming home where she belongs. And you have the audacity to claim, a piece of the family vacation home? The familiar guilt began to rise, but I tamped it down, reminding myself of the forensic accountant's report. Dad, I paid those property taxes for 6 years. I funded family vacations, covered Vanessa's car payments, and contributed nearly $500,000 to maintaining a lifestyle you claimed to provide, but actually couldn't afford without my help. All while you secretly funded a trust for Vanessa. That trust is for your sister's security, he insisted for the 100th time. And what about my security? I countered. You never concerned yourself with that. In fact, you actively exploited my financial success for the family's benefit. Specifically, for Vanessa's benefit. A heavy silence fell, broken only by my father's ragged breathing. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted from rage to something more calculated. Natalie, I don't think you understand the severity of what you've done. Your mother is threatening divorce. 36 years of marriage, potentially destroyed because you couldn't accept your role in this family. My role as the cash cow. You mean? The words came out sharper than I intended. Your role as the responsible one, he shot back. The one we could count on. The one who understood family obligation. That's just it, Dad. Family obligation should be mutual. It shouldn't flow in only one direction. Another pause. Then his voice turned conciliatory. Look, I understand you're upset about the trust fund. Perhaps we could establish something similar for you, if that would make you feel better. The transparent attempt at manipulation was almost laughable. I don't want or need a trust fund. Dad, I've built my own financial security despite the lack of support from you. What I wanted was acknowledgement of the inequality, an apology for the deception, and a commitment to fairness going forward. And this partial ownership of the Aspen House? That's not about money? His tone was accusatory. It's about fairness, I repeated. About recognizing my contributions rather than continuing to exploit them. He sighed heavily. You've changed, Natalie. You used to understand the importance of family. I still do, Dad, but I've realized that real family isn't about financial exploitation disguised as obligation. It's about mutual respect, honesty, and equitable treatment. I paused, then added gently, I hope someday you'll understand that, too. Don't patronize me, he snapped. This conversation isn't over. I'll be speaking with my attorneys about contesting this property transfer. That's your right, I acknowledged. But before you spend money on litigation, you might want to consult with Mom. My understanding is that she's already consulted with family law specialists who confirmed her right to transfer her portion of the marital property. With a curse, he hung up. I set my phone down, surprisingly calm despite the confrontation. His threats no longer held the power to intimidate me. I had documentation, legal standing, and most importantly, the clarity that comes from finally recognizing and rejecting manipulation. Later that day, I received a text from Vanessa that surprised me with its subdued tone. Can we talk? Not about money, just talk, please. After a moment's hesitation, I replied, Coffee tomorrow? 2 p.m. at Milo's on Randolph? Her response was immediate. I'll be there. Thank you. I approached the meeting with cautious curiosity. Vanessa and I had never had a relationship independent. Of our parents' influence, she had always been the favored one, the princess, while I was the reliable workhorse. What could we possibly have to say to each other without that dynamic in play? Milo's was a casual neighborhood cafe, deliberately different from the upscale establishments Vanessa typically preferred. I arrived a few minutes early and selected a table in the back corner, ordering a simple black coffee. At precisely 2:00, Vanessa walked in, and I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer clothes, the perfectly styled hair, the expensive accessories. Instead, she wore jeans, a simple blouse, and minimal makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and for the first time in years, she looked like a normal 30-year-old woman, rather than a carefully curated Instagram persona. "Hi," she said, hesitantly, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thanks for meeting me." Of course. I studied her, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the slight downward turn of her mouth that suggested recent stress. "You look different," she gave a humorless laugh. "Turns out designer clothes are hard to justify when you're suddenly on a budget." She ordered a plain coffee when the server approached, another departure from her usual complicated specialty drinks. Once we were alone again, she took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Natalie. A big one." The admission caught me off guard. Of all the possible openings to our conversation, a straightforward apology was the least expected. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks," she continued, when I didn't immediately respond. "About our family, about how differently we've been treated, about how much you've contributed while I just took." "This is a surprising level of self-awareness from you," I observed, not unkindly. She nodded. "It didn't come easily. At first I was furious. At you for abandoning the family. At Mom for suddenly taking your side. At Dad for reducing my trust. Fund deposits." She stared into her coffee. "Then I was scared. I've never really had to support myself before. Every time I've tried to establish a career, Dad has bailed me out when it got difficult." "I remember," I said neutrally. "The thing is," she continued, "when Mom moved out and Dad started drinking every night, I had to face some hard truths. I started looking at bank statements, at the records of everything you've paid for over the years, including my car lease, which I never knew came from you. Dad told you he was covering it? He implied it was coming from family funds, and I never questioned what that meant." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I should have. I should have asked where the money was coming from, especially when I knew how hard you worked while she gestured vaguely, floated." The admission was more than I had expected from my self-absorbed sister. What changed? Why the sudden introspection? "Reality crashed in," she said simply. "With you cutting off financial support and Mom leaving, Dad's house of cards started collapsing. He can't actually afford the lifestyle he's created for us. For me, without your subsidies. The Aspen house taxes are overdue, there's a lien warning. My trust fund deposits have been reduced. My wedding venue canceled our reservation when the deposit didn't arrive." "I'm sorry about your wedding," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of the sentiment. "Despite everything, I didn't want to ruin your special day." "That's the thing," she said with a sad smile. "You didn't ruin anything. You just stopped enabling an artificial reality. Jason and I are planning a much smaller wedding now. Backyard, close friends, simple food. And honestly, it feels more authentic than the production I was planning before." "Jason is still in the picture, even with the downsized wedding?" She nodded, a genuine smile briefly illuminating her face. "Turns out he loves me, not my trust fund. He's been amazing through all this. Supportive, practical. He's helped me create a budget, apply for jobs, even sell some of my designer stuff online to generate cash." "I'm glad," I said, meaning it. "Everyone deserves that kind of support." "Including you," she said quietly. "I never realized how little support you received from our parents, even as you were supporting all of us. It wasn't fair, Natalie. None of it was fair." The simple acknowledgement, the thing I had been seeking all along, hit me with unexpected force. Tears pricked at my eyes. "Thank you for saying that," I managed. Vanessa reached across the table, tentatively placing her hand over mine. "I know an apology doesn't fix anything, and I know we can't just erase decades of inequality overnight. But I want you to know that I see it now. I understand what happened, and I'm ashamed of my part in it." "Your part?" "I played into it," she admitted. "I enjoyed being the favorite, the special one. I never questioned why I deserved more support than you. I just accepted it as my due." She withdrew her hand, wrapping it around her coffee cup. "That stops now. I'm getting a job. 2 interviews next week. I'm selling my designer clothes and bags. Jason and I are looking at smaller apartments with reasonable rent." The transformation seemed almost too dramatic to be credible. "What does Dad think about all this?" Her expression hardened. "Dad thinks I'm betraying him, just like Mom and you. He doesn't understand why I won't just wait out this rough patch and let him fix things so we can go back to normal." "And what do you think?" "I think normal was broken," she said firmly. "Normal was you carrying everyone while getting nothing in return. Normal was Dad creating a false reality he couldn't sustain. Normal was me living like a perpetual teenager with no responsibilities." She shook her head. "I don't want to go back to that." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between us. Finally, I asked the question that had been nagging at me. "Why now, Vanessa? What really sparked this change in you?" She considered the question carefully. "It was Mom, actually. After she moved out, she came to see me. Showed me all the documentation, the family expenses you've covered, the trust fund details, everything. Then she asked me a question no one had ever asked me before. 'What kind of person do you want to be?' And what did you answer?" I said, "I wanted to be someone my sister could respect." She replied softly, "Someone worthy of being your equal, not just your burden." The simple honesty of her answer disarmed me completely. For the first time in my adult life, I looked at my sister and saw not the favored princess who had benefited from my exploitation, but a woman trying to grow beyond the limitations of her upbringing. "So what happens now?" I asked, echoing the question that had become something of a refrain in this family upheaval. "Now I grow up," she said, with a determined set to her jaw. "I find a job, live within my means, build a marriage based on partnership rather than princess fantasies. And," she hesitated, "if you're open to it, maybe we try to build a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than competition and resentment." The offer was tempting, yet I remained cautious. "That would take time, Vanessa. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight." "I know. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or sisterly bonding. Just an open door. A possibility." I considered her request, weighing the decades of inequality against this newfound awareness. "I think I can offer that. An open door, a possibility. We'll see where it leads." Her smile was tentative but genuine. "That's more than I deserve, but I'll take it." As we finished our coffee, Vanessa mentioned almost casually, "I told Dad I'm not accepting any more trust fund deposits. I asked him to use that money to pay the taxes on the Aspen house instead." "You did what?" I couldn't hide my shock. "It was the right thing to do," she said simply. "I don't deserve special treatment at your expense. Never did." It was a small step in the grand scheme of things, but its symbolic importance was enormous. For the first time, Vanessa had actively rejected the favoritism that had defined our family dynamic. "Thank you," I said, the words inadequate for the meaning behind them. "Don't thank me for basic decency," she replied with unexpected wisdom. "Just maybe give me a chance to show you who I can be now that I'm finally growing up." As we parted outside the cafe, she hesitated, then gave me a quick, awkward hug. "I have a long way to go to make things right," she whispered. "But I'm going to try, Natalie. I promise I'm going to try. I watched her walk away, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. Cautious hope, lingering wariness, and something that felt dangerously like the beginning of forgiveness. My phone pinged with a text from Eleanor. Check your email. The ownership. Transfer for the Aspen property has been officially recorded. Congratulations on owning 25% of a vacation home you've been paying for all along. I smiled at her characteristic blend of support and pragmatism, then typed back, "The strangest thing just happened." Vanessa apologized. Sincerely apologized. Eleanor's response was immediate. Miracles do happen. Cautious optimism warranted. Maintain boundaries. Sound advice, as always. The road ahead would require precisely that balance. Openness to genuine change while maintaining the healthy boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. For now, though, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The scales of family justice were beginning, slowly but surely, to balance. 1 year after discovering the trust fund document that changed everything, I stood on the deck of the Aspen vacation home, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The property looked different now, not physically, but in what it represented. No longer a symbol of exploitation, it had become a testament to my reclaimed power and worth. I now owned a 25% stake in the house, an acknowledgement of the years I'd spent paying its taxes and maintenance. The property management company my mother had hired was working out well, generating rental income when the family wasn't using it. My portion of the profits had already yielded $15,450, a satisfying return on what had once been a one-sided financial drain. "Beautiful evening," my mother said, joining me on the deck with 2 glasses of wine. She looked different too, lighter somehow, unburdened by the weight of decades spent enabling my father's manipulation. "Perfect," I agreed, accepting the glass she offered. "Hard to believe it's been a year." "So much has changed," she mused, leaning against the railing. "Some days I barely recognize our family." The transformation had indeed been remarkable. After my mother's unexpected allyship and her decision to legally transfer 25% of the property to me, the family's power dynamics had shifted dramatically. My father had fought it, of course, threatening lawsuits, attempting to leverage emotional manipulation, even trying to rally extended family members against me. None of it had worked. "I got an email from Vanessa today," I said, sipping my wine. "She's finished her first semester of business courses, straight A's." Mom smiled proudly. "She's discovering talents she never knew she had. When you're not defined solely as the pretty one or the one who needs help, there's room to grow." Vanessa's journey had perhaps been the most surprising. After our coffee shop conversation, she had followed through on every promise, selling her designer clothes, scaling back her wedding to something modest but meaningful, taking community college courses, and finding a job. She and Jason now lived in a small but comfortable apartment that they paid for themselves. Last month, she had called me with genuine excitement about a marketing concept she'd developed for a class project. "The professor says I have a natural talent for it," she'd said, her voice filled with the pride of earned accomplishment rather than entitled expectation. "I never knew I could be good at something on my own merit." "How are the divorce proceedings going?" I asked my mother, knowing it remained a sensitive subject. She sighed. "Final hearing next month. Your father is still contesting the settlement, but his attorney has advised him that he's fighting a losing battle. The documentation is too comprehensive." She gave me a knowing look. "Thanks to your meticulous record-keeping and Patricia's forensic analysis." The divorce had been my father's last-ditch attempt to maintain control. When emotional manipulation failed, when financial leverage disappeared, when extended family support evaporated in the face of documented evidence of his exploitation, he had resorted to legal obstruction, dragging out proceedings, hiding assets, claiming my mother was mentally unstable for suddenly questioning his financial decisions after decades of marriage. "And how are you feeling about all of it?" I asked. "Sad, sometimes," she admitted. 36 years is a long time to share with someone. There are good memories mixed with the bad. She straightened her shoulders. But mostly, I feel liberated. Dr. Chen says it's normal to grieve the relationship I thought I had, even while recognizing how unhealthy it actually was. We both had been seeing therapists over the past year. Me with Dr. Levine, who specialized in family financial abuse, and my mother with Dr. Chen, who focused on helping women rebuild their identities after controlling relationships. "Uncle Richard called yesterday," I said. "Apparently, Dad showed up at his house demanding he talk some sense into us women." I couldn't help smiling at the absurdity. Uncle Richard suggested a therapist might be more helpful than continued manipulation. "Your father still doesn't understand what happened," Mom said, shaking her head. "He genuinely believes this is a temporary rebellion that will eventually end with everyone returning to their proper roles. Him in control, me obedient. You financially supporting the family, Vanessa dependent and adored. Will he ever understand, do you think?" She considered this. "Perhaps eventually, when enough time passes and we don't return to our proper roles, when he sees that we're all healthier and happier without his manipulation." She shrugged. "Or perhaps never. His identity is too wrapped up in being the family patriarch, the presumed provider, the decision-maker." "It's strange," I mused. A year ago, I was desperate for his acknowledgement, for him to admit the unfairness, to apologize for the exploitation, to commit to change. Now it doesn't matter nearly as much, she finished for me. Exactly. My healing doesn't depend on his recognition anymore. That had been the most profound shift of all, from seeking external validation to trusting my own experience. The original confrontation at the Langham had been about forcing my father to acknowledge the inequality, to admit the deception. When he refused, it had felt devastating. But over time, I had discovered that his acknowledgement wasn't necessary for my liberation. My mother's support, Vanessa's growth, my extended family's validation, the professional confirmation from Eleanor, and Patricia all had helped me trust my own perceptions and establish healthier boundaries regardless of my father's continued denial. "I found something interesting in the storage room yesterday," Mom said, changing the subject. She pulled an envelope from her pocket. "I thought you might want to see it." I opened the envelope to find a college application essay I'd written. At 17, applying for a scholarship. The prompt had asked about career goals, and I'd written passionately about wanting to pursue finance, to understand how money could be a tool for security and independence rather than control. "I'd forgotten about this," I said softly, skimming the earnest words of my teenage self. "You were so clear about your path even then," Mom observed. "I found it while sorting through old papers and realized you've become exactly the person you aspired to be. Successful, independent, ethical in your financial dealings. Not without detours," I pointed out. "Those years of subsidizing the family while getting nothing in return weren't exactly part of the plan." "No," she agreed. "But they brought you here, to this moment of clarity and strength, and they gave you a mission." The mission she referred to was the Elise Winters Foundation for Financial Empowerment, the organization I had established with the $487,934 check my mother had given me, the exact amount I had contributed to family expenses over the years. Rather than simply depositing it, I had used it to create a nonprofit that provided scholarships, mentoring, and financial literacy education to young women without family financial support. Last month, we had awarded our first 5 scholarships to promising students who, like me, were working multiple jobs to fund their education with minimal family help. The foundation had also launched a mentorship program pairing these students with successful women in finance, women like Eleanor, who had volunteered her time as our first mentor. The foundation website got over 1,000 hits yesterday, I told Mom, after that article in the Tribune about our scholarship recipients. 3 more financial firms have contacted me about sponsoring additional scholarships. Your grandmother would be so proud, Mom said, referring to her mother Elise, the foundation's namesake. She always believed financial independence was the key to women's freedom. She tried to teach me, but Dad isolated you from those influences, I finished gently. It's a common tactic in financial control. Yes. But now I'm learning, even at 58. She smiled. Better late than never, as my therapist reminds me. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the mountains, bathing the valley in a golden glow. Inside the house, lights flicked on automatically, creating a warm invitation to the approaching evening. Winters Capital Partners passed $10 million in assets under management last week, I said, changing the subject to something lighter. 2 years ahead of my business plan projections. Congratulations! That's wonderful news! Mom's enthusiasm was genuine. My venture into independent financial management had been another unexpected blessing of this journey. After cutting financial ties with my family, I had accelerated my long-deferred dream of starting my own firm. With Eleanor's mentorship and Marcus's industry connections, Winters Capital Partners had launched 6 months ago, targeting ethical investments for women-owned businesses and first-generation wealth builders. We should celebrate, Mom declared. I'll make reservations at that new restaurant in town tomorrow night. Make it for 3, I suggested. I invited Vanessa to join us for the weekend. She gets in tomorrow afternoon. The prospect of having both my mother and sister here, in a setting once dominated by my father's manipulative presence, felt like reclaiming not just the property, but the concept of family itself. Inside, my phone chimed with an incoming email. I excused myself to check it, finding a message from my attorney. Final papers filed in property dispute. Your 25% ownership stake is now absolutely secured and no longer contestable. Congratulations. Another piece of the victory, another confirmation. That standing up for myself had been the right choice, regardless of the emotional cost. When I returned to the deck, Mom had lit the outdoor fire pit, creating a cozy spot to watch the emerging stars. We settled into the comfortable chairs, wrapped in soft blankets against the mountain evening chill. I've been thinking about forgiveness, I said after a while. Dr. Levine says it's a personal choice, not an obligation. What do you think? Mom asked, gazing into the flames. I think I've forgiven Vanessa. Her entitlement was cultivated by Dad. She didn't create the dynamic. And she's working hard to change. And me? She asked quietly. I considered this. I'm getting there. Your actions this past year, the property transfer, establishing boundaries with Dad, supporting the foundation, they've helped. A lot. And your father? The harder question. I don't know, I admitted. Sometimes I think I've forgiven him for my own peace. Other times, when I remember how deliberately he exploited me while privileging Vanessa, how he manipulated all of us for years, I shook my head. Maybe forgiveness isn't binary. Maybe it's a spectrum, and I'm somewhere in the middle with him. That's valid, Mom assured me. Dr. Chen says forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It just means not letting the hurt control your future. By that definition, perhaps I had forgiven him. The rage that had initially fueled my rebellion had transformed into something calmer, more centered. A clear-eyed recognition of the unhealthy dynamics without the burning need to make him acknowledge them. What I know for certain, I said, watching the flames dance in the fire pit, is that I'm done seeking his approval or validation. Done feeling guilty for establishing boundaries. Done questioning my own worth because he valued me only for what I could contribute. That's more important than forgiveness, Mom agreed. That's freedom. Freedom. The word resonated deeply. Financial freedom, emotional freedom, psychological freedom from the narratives that had constrained me for so long. As night fell completely over the mountains, we sat in comfortable silence, no longer burdened by unspoken expectations or manipulative undercurrents. The Aspen House, once a symbol of my exploitation, had become something else entirely. A monument to reclaimed power, to healthy boundaries, to the new family we were creating based on mutual respect rather than control. The property taxes were paid, proportionally according to ownership stakes. The trust fund deposits to Vanessa had stopped, at her own request. The foundation was thriving. Winters Capital Partners was exceeding projections. My relationship with my mother was healing. My sister was discovering her own capabilities. Not everything was resolved. My father remained entrenched in his position, believing his daughters and wife had temporarily lost their minds rather than permanently found their voices. The divorce proceedings continued to be contentious. Family gatherings were complex negotiations of boundaries and expectations. But the fundamental change remained intact. I had stopped allowing myself to be exploited. I had claimed my rightful place not as the family ATM, but as an equal member deserving of respect and fairness. I had transformed nearly $500,000 of obligation into a foundation that would help other young women avoid the same pitfalls. Do you ever regret it? Mom asked suddenly. Standing up to your father? Refusing to keep paying for everything? Starting this whole cascade of change? I considered the questions seriously, reflecting on the emotional toll of the past year, the confrontations, the legal battles, the painful revelations, the grieving for the family I had thought we were. Not for a second, I said finally, with absolute certainty. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the most necessary. She nodded, understanding completely. To the necessary things, she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. I clinked my glass against hers. And to creating something better from the wreckage. Above us, the stars emerged in full brilliance, no longer obscured by the fading light of day. Like truth, they had been there all along, waiting to be seen once the clouds of deception cleared. And like me, they shone with their own light, no longer dimmed by the expectations of others or the obligation to illuminate paths not of their choosing, free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.